you'd like to turn to Romans chapter 13, beginning with verse 1, we're going to read just a few verses there in a minute. Here in the United States of America, particularly the states, southern states, which I spent most of my time in the Sun Belt. But one of the great mottos, slogans, values that we have is stated in three things. Might also say priorities. God, family, country. Our country is almost 250 years old. And I remember King Charles came recently, visited the United States of America. And in one of the speeches that he gave, he said, yeah, 250 years. Or in Britain, what we call just the other day. Okay. And you know, he got a lot of laughs on that one. What a grand experiment. You know, next week, next Sunday, the Lord willing, we're going to talk about freedom. We're going to talk about citizenship. I want to start that by preluding the context of what we're going to talk about next Sunday in the sermon with another lesson. And that stems from what God himself says through the Apostle Paul in Romans chapter 13. And so let's read that. I'll save some of my comments for next week. I need to do that because it'll be like, you know, if I try to preach it all at once, which you know I could do, but I'm not going to do it, okay? So Romans chapter 13, beginning with verse 1. Paul writing the church in Rome. Let every soul be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and the authorities that exist are appointed by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authority resists the ordinance of God, and those who resist will bring judgment on themselves. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to evil. Do you want to be unafraid of the authority? Do what is good, and you will have praise from the same. For he is God's minister to you for good. But if you do evil, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. For he is God's minister, an avenger to execute wrath on him who practices evil. Therefore, you must be subject, not only because of wrath, but also for conscience sake. For because of this, you also pay taxes, for they are God's ministers, attending continually to this very thing. Render, therefore, to all their due. Taxes to whom taxes are due, customs to whom customs, fear to whom fear, honor to whom honor. From the very beginning, God chose, instituted three institutions. I'm going to call them institutions. I think you'll understand what I mean. The very first was the home in the Garden of Eden. God made the man, God made the woman. There was a home. Children came to that home. That was given to us by God. God established the church, and we understand about the importance of that. The church, in fact, includes Jesus. I don't know whether we think about that very much, because he is the head of the body, and the body is the church. And so to say that institution doesn't have a head would be to make a mistake. The institution of the church is to put Jesus as head over his body, and we as members of that great body. He also established another institution, and that is the government. The government is from God. Now, that doesn't mean that every government in our world does what God wants them to do, but he has. And even our passage that we just read, I read from the New King James Version, and it says the authorities that exist, but the old King James Version said the powers that be. Have you ever heard that saying before? And God is responsible, directly responsible for bringing into existence a system to where that we are not living like in the days of the book of Judges. In the book of Judges, it says that every person did that which was right in their own eyes. That's not going to be a good world to live in. Anarchy, no government, no control over all the evil that's in the world. God did not want us to live in a world that is like that. And so one of the things that he created was the authorities, the government. And of course, there's ways, like I said, for those things to be. People that are members of the church don't always do what they're supposed to either. People who are members of a physical family don't always do what they're supposed to either. But God meant for the home to be a blessing. God meant for the church and its members to be a blessing. And he means for our society having government to help us keep everything peaceful and running properly, to be a blessing to us. But let's not forget, 2 Chronicles verse 16 and verse 9, God has always been king. And actually we're shown, I can't go too far afield on too many things this morning, but not only has God been king, but a monarchy has been shown to be one of the best forms of government. In Christ, we have a king. The good thing about our king is, number one, he's a good king. And number two, he lives forever. So even if you have a good king in this world, when the king dies, it could all be over with. We have a good king, and he's going to live forever. God has always been king. 1 Samuel 8 and verse 7, when Samuel came and complained to God that the people wanted to have an earthly king, a physical king, like all the other nations, God said, don't worry about it. I'm paraphrasing. God said, don't worry about it, Samuel. They're not rejecting you. They're rejecting me, because I am their king. And of course, we realize the bringing in of Saul and all that came place. I want to read just a little bit here. And he said, this will be the manner of the king that shall reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them for himself, and his chariots and his horsemen, and some shall run before his chariots. And he will appoint him captains over thousands, captains over 50s, and will set them to plow his ground and to reap his harvest, and to make his instruments of war and instruments for his chariots. And he will take your daughters to be confectionaries, and to be cooks, and to be bakers. And he will take your fields and your vineyards and your olive yards, even the best of them, and give them to his servants. And he will take the tenth of your seed and of your vineyards, and give them to his officers and to his servants. And he will take your men servants and your maid servants and the goodliest young men and your donkeys, and put them to his work. He will take the tenth of your sheep, and you shall be his servant. Well, you have to watch it. And that, of course, is one of the main reasons why our country was born, because of tyranny. And I'd like to talk more about that, and I'd like to have a civics class and all that this morning. But I can't spend too much time on it. There's so much I would just love to say about all that this morning. But it was tyranny. And especially is that important to us, I want to stress the context that we're talking about, being gathered together in the Christian assembly this morning, is that there's still places in our world that were like the old world, that people came across the ocean to come and form our country because they were not allowed to practice the religion that God had placed upon them. They were not able to preach the gospel and live the life that God wanted them to be able to live. And so they came over here to be free from the tyranny. There are still places in our world today where you cannot preach the gospel. And when you go into that country, you better not say that you're going in there to do any evangelizing, to try to convince their people to change their mind spiritually about anything. It's still that way. What a blessing we have in that. Well, God's always ruled in the affairs of men. He ruled the people in the patriarchal age, in the Mosaic age, during the age of the judges and the kings. And finally, when Jesus came into the world, God was the king even when the Roman Empire was going on. As corrupt as it often was, God put them in authority. I think one of the most curious things about God and his use of government, did you know that God is going to use you one way or the other? I hope you realize that. You can be a good part of his plan or be on the bad side of his plan. He is going to use all of us according to our own decisions. And that's exactly what happened to Israel. God worked with Israel, and when they were faithful to him, he blessed them. And when they turned away from him, he punished them, and he attempted to bring them back to him. But when he finally got to the point after the age of the kings, remember Saul, David, Solomon, and then a whole plethora of kings came after that, when they finally and ultimately turned their back on God, he made the Babylonians come in. First the Chaldeans, but then the Babylonians come in and taught them a lesson. When you turn away from God, your blessings can end. What a great lesson that is for us to remember today. And here's the curious part. He allowed the Babylonians to come in and to take them away into captivity. But then just a few years after that, the Medes and the Persians came over and captivated the Babylonians. And God said he made to where that they would overcome the Babylonians to show them, how dare you do anything against my chosen people. Now that's a curious thing. And God does work in our world in that way, using people according to their own decisions and according to their own governmental decisions as well, either to bless us or to teach us a lesson. The Pharisees sent their disciples and Herodians to Jesus to ask on one occasion, "Tell us therefore, what do you think? Is it lawful to give tribute unto Caesar or not?" And Jesus, of course, if you remember Matthew chapter 22, verses 15 and following, that he asked for a coin. Boy, I wish I had one of those coins. I really do. It was a denarius, and on the face of that coin, Jesus said, whose inscription is on the coin? Whose face is on that coin? And everybody answered, it's Caesar's image that's on the coin. And Jesus made that hallmark statement that we still go by today. Render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and render unto God, give to God the things that belong to God. Jesus believed in paying taxes, Matthew chapter 17, 24 through 27. I don't know whether he liked paying taxes, but he did pay taxes. I don't find any passage in the Bible that says you necessarily have to like it, okay? But you do have, we're supposed to pay them. Jesus believed in paying the tax. Now, he paid it in an unusual way. He told Peter to go catch a fish and said, "Go look in the mouth of the fish, and you'll see 2 coins. Use 1 coin for me and 1 coin for you," right? To pay your taxes. I've looked in a lot of fish's mouth since then, but there's never been the tax money inside of the fish's mouth. When Jesus was being interrogated by Pilate later, Jesus gave no answer to any of his questions. Pilate said, John chapter 19, beginning with verse 8, "Do you not speak to me? Do you not know that I have the power, the authority to crucify you, and the power, the authority to release you?" And Jesus answered and said something that we should remember. Says, "You could have no authority, no power at all against me unless it was given you from above. Therefore, he who delivered me unto you has the greater sin." Paul recognized the Roman government. We're going to talk about that more. Jesus recognized the Roman government. Paul recognized the Roman government. We're going to take a look at this passage right here in Acts chapter 22 and verse 25. Paul was brought into a castle. He was scourged, whipped, and bound. And then Paul asked the centurion, "Is it lawful for you to scourge a man that is a Roman and uncondemned?" Upon hearing this, the centurion went to the chief captain and said, "Take heed what you do, for this man is a Roman." The chief captain asked Paul, "Tell me, are you a Roman?" And Paul gave that one-word answer that tells us a lot about Paul. He said, "Yes, I am a Roman." The chief captain, with a great sum, "I obtained this freedom." And Paul said, "Yes, but I was freeborn." And the chief captain got very afraid because he realized that they had just whipped, scourged a Roman citizen, and that they could be killed for doing that. But they didn't even think to ask. But please notice that Paul considered himself to be a Roman citizen. Keep that in mind for next Sunday when we'll expand on that more. Let's take a look now for the rest of the time at our text. First of all, it says, "Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers." Paul's addressing Christians when he says every soul. And I don't know about you, but I don't necessarily always like or agree with all of our laws that we have in this country. But here we're told to be subject, to subject ourselves to the authorities, to be law-abiding citizens. We're kind of spoiled in America in a way because we kind of take our freedoms for granted. We have the freedom of the press. We have the freedom of speech. Very important for us, we have freedom of religion. That doesn't exist in all nations. In Acts the 5th chapter, the apostles were arrested for preaching Christ, and they were told not to teach in Jesus' name. Wow, that would make headlines if something like that happened here. And here is the answer that we need to also go by. Acts chapter 5, verse 25. Peter said, "We ought to obey God rather than man." Do I have to keep the laws of the country that I live in? Not only in the United States of America, but when I go on a trip and go into another country, I'm supposed to keep their laws too. Okay? So the authorities that exist, we're supposed to keep the laws that we can keep, but if they go against the law of God, we have to obey God rather than men. And when we go into a country where they tell us that we cannot preach the gospel, guess what? We will preach the gospel because we ought to obey God rather than men. There is no power but of God, and the powers or authorities that be are ordained of God, specifically chosen for him. Daniel said in Daniel chapter 2, verse 21, "And he changes the times and the seasons, and removes kings and sets them up. He gives wisdom unto the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding." Please realize that in our world, God is working behind the scenes. And I'm not necessarily talking about in a miraculous way, but in a providential way. God is at work, and I can't always see it. Sometimes I can look back and say, you know what? God had his hand in that. That if he wasn't involved in that, I would be, that would really surprise me. And we see providential things happen like that. And you realize that our world, from the top down to the bottom, God is in control. God is making things happen. It's ordained, chosen by him. It happened from the time that Nebuchadnezzar's dream was talked about. The Babylonian Empire was overthrown by the Medes and the Persians. They were overthrown by the Greeks. And the Greeks were overthrown by the Romans. And lots of changes have happened in our world, one of which happened in 1776, when that Declaration was written. And one of the things that I like about the Declaration and the Constitution, which, by the way, is later on, I think 1789 is when the Constitution was put together. What are the first three words in the Constitution of the United States of America? We the people, right? And there comes that point when I think is important as a Christian, is that we realize that as human beings, no matter what country you're in, no matter where you are, who you are on earth, we have been endowed by our Creator with certain rights that are not supposed to be able to be taken away of. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We're not guaranteed happiness, by the way. We're guaranteed the pursuit of happiness. But those three things, and that's in our Declaration and our Constitution. That grand experiment that we're in, and yet we often don't have the right perspective. A poem, not serried ranks with flags unfurled, not armored ships that gird the world, nor hoardeth wealth, nor busy mills, not cattle on 1,000 hills, not sages wise for schools nor laws, not boasted deeds in freedom's cause. All these may be, and yet the state in God's keen eye be far from great. That land is great that knows the Lord, whose songs are guided by his word, where justice rules twixt man and man, where love controls in art and plan, where breathing in his nature air, each soul finds joy and praise and prayer. Thus may our country, good and great, be God's delight and man's first estate. It's awesome, that responsibility that our governmental people have. And the government, you remember, is going to be all the way from the top ranks, like will be the president, those that are in Congress and everything, all the way down to the police force. In most countries, I was surprised when I started to travel, they don't have a separate police force. The military is the police force. And those that are soldiers that we see in the scriptures were not told to quit being a soldier. They were told to become good soldiers, which is interesting. Another interesting question that we can perhaps have studies on later on about being in the police force, being in the government. I hope that our government will remain good. I hope that it is good now. I hope that it's good all the way down to the local level. But I know one thing for sure. I know what God wants it to be. And I know another thing for sure. I know as citizens what he wants us to be as Christians, to fit in to the system that is working for him. Our text says, whoever resisteth the power resists the ordinance of God, and those who resist shall receive to themselves judgment And that's judgment in a negative connotation, condemnation. The powers that are used as God's tools toward law and order. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to the evil, Romans 13 and verse 3. When a person does good, we would expect, and this is generally true. This is not going to be true in a corrupt situation. But generally, when things are working God's way, if you do that which is good, you will receive praise from the people that he has put into power. And when you do evil, guess what? It says that power, that authority that he has put in place does not bear the sword in vain. Let's put it in modern context. They don't wear a gun for nothing, okay? They don't wear a gun for nothing. The authority that God has put into place. Verse 4 says, for he is a minister of God to you for good. I remember times in the past when law and order was probably better than it is today. And I remember talking to my father and my grandparents about days when they lived out and left the doors unlocked. Doesn't happen anymore. At least I don't do it. I don't know whether y'all do that or not. Please don't tell me if you don't lock your doors, okay? I don't want to know. But that used to be common, at times in our history. And histories change. It's a very complex thing. If you look back at the history of our country or of any country, how things go up and down. He bears not the sword in vain. Let's not be evildoers. We must respect the governmental authorities. We're not supposed to be anti-government. Christians are not anti-government. They are pro-government. They are just pro-good government. And hopefully we can be involved. We the people means we are involved. I have a voice in our country. And guess who's given me that voice? God. God has given me a voice. And I want to use that voice to try and make things good and the way that he wants to do. I have a small voice. I guess if I go out and yell, I have a big voice, but my small voice in our government system is our vote. And God gave me that vote, and I need to use my voice. Render therefore to all their dues, it says in verse 7, tribute to whom tribute is due, custom to whom custom, fear to whom fear, honor to whom honor. Peter said in 1 Peter 2, 13 through 17, submit yourselves to every ordinance of man for the Lord's sake, whether it be to the king as supreme, or unto governors as unto those that are sent by him for the punishment of evildoers, and for the praise of them that do well. For so is the will of God, that with well-doing you may put to silence the ignorance of foolish men, as free, and not using your liberty for a cloak of maliciousness, but rather as the servants of God. Honor all people, love the brotherhood, fear God, honor the king. There's so many other things that I could say this morning, but if our nation is to remain great, it will remain a nation that is trying to serve God. And that begins, if judgment must begin, it will begin with the house of God, the house of faith, you and me, the church that Jesus established and that we are trying to represent in our world today. And may we always be people who try to fulfill the will of God. And part of that is to fit in whatever political or civic system that we find ourselves in, as much as we possibly can, within the limits that God has given to us, that we must obey him rather than men, but that we will obey the ordinance of mankind in the system that we live in as closely as we can. God ultimately wants people, everybody in the world to be able to look at us and say, now there's an example of a good, you put fill in the blank. I'm going to put in there American. There's an example of a good American, and that is a Christian that is trying to live a good life and be part of the system that they find themselves in. Therefore, all things whatsoever you would that men would do to you, do you even to them. For this is the law and the prophets. And this is the best way that we can live with our fellow man and be kind and courteous and respectful to one another, is to simply realize, treat you the way that I want you to treat me. And in the Law and Order, a long time ago, they had an episode that says basically what that means is my rights end at the tip of your nose. I have rights in this country, but when they start messing with your rights, that's where my rights end. Treat one another the way you want to be treated. That's the way God put it in His Word. I leave you with that this morning. There's so many other things that could be said. I hope that you enjoyed the lesson and enjoy thinking about this, that you'll take something away from it, and maybe it'll enhance your life. I would love to be able to have been a part of that. If somebody needs to come forward this morning, we always offer the invitation publicly whenever we assemble together. If you want to become a Christian, if you're a believer, if you're ready to change your mind about your past and begin following Jesus today and trying to live the will of God and do what Christ would have us do in our age today. If you want to confess Him as the Son of God, we'll baptize you into Christ this morning. That can happen. We have time to do that this morning. If you want to come forward and sit on the front row. If you're a Christian and you need prayer to the church for some reason, we also offer that in a public way. We'll pray for you this morning if you have something that you especially want us to pray for. If there's something in your life that you're having trouble with, we can certainly do that. And all that is offered privately 24/7 whenever. Please just let somebody know, I want to become a Christian. I want to start living a Christian life right now. Let's get together and do that. I need the prayers of the church. Please let everybody know. We can take care of that in a private way as well. But if you're ready to come forward publicly, we're ready for you to come forward. Why don't you do it right now while we stand and sing?